Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 2016 Nonprofit Leadership Development Webinar Series. This September, we are talking about taming transitions, seemingly a perfect topic to be discussing during this particular season of year, and particularly if you live in the Midwest, as we are making our transition from summer to fall and dealing with all of the changes that go along with that seasonal change. So welcome. We are going to get started here. Encourage you to use your chat feature for questions and curiosities, as well as any other features allowed here in the webinar technology. When we think about our time here today, I would ask all of you to prepare yourselves, take a moment, take a deep breath in and out, and really reflect for a moment on why you invested this time today. Critical for your learning and professional development, but also want to make sure that you get what you need out of this information. So start, if you haven't already, by closing the door to outside distractions. Be those the distractions in your mind or closing that physical door so that you can create your own learning space here today. Encourage you to silence your electronic devices, or at least put them into a mode that will be less distracting, particularly if you happen to be joining our webinar with others here today. Also, turn off all other applications on your computer. This is really helpful so that you don't get interrupted by the email notifications, or if you're watching in a group here today, that everyone in the room doesn't know what's happening with your email traffic. And then obviously get comfortable in your surroundings. If that means kicking off your shoes, sitting back in the chair, standing up and walking around, whatever helps you learn and take in information, encourage you to do that and make those adjustments right now. Some of the logistics, attendees will be muted during the call. That's particularly why we encourage you to use the chat function and send in comments, curiosities, or observations on any of the information that we'll share today. If you are getting an echo, you may need to switch to a headset or to a telephone call-in, and make sure that if you have one, it's or the other. Using both can also create some challenges with the technology. And again, if you do have a question or need a clarification, please use that chat function to send a message directly to me, and I will answer it in the moment or at the end of our content here today. So those are our logistics, and now it is time to get started on taming transitions. So, of course, the only joy in the world is to begin. That goes not only for our webinar here today, but also when we think about affecting enhancements or improvement in ourselves, in our organizations, in our communities, in the general society. So to go about and begin and find that joy. And today, when we think about beginnings, we're going to talk about understanding change, making some of the distinctions between changes and transitions. A lot of times that language is used interchangeably, and they're actually somewhat distinct. And as leaders, particularly leaders in nonprofits where we see a certain constancy to change, understanding what change is will help us manage transitions. So we'll understand the distinction and then go through the various phases of transitions so that we can better understand as leaders and as individuals how to manage that transition process. So then that will lead into navigating the landscape, whether that's for yourself facing a change and working your way through, for a team, for an organization. And also we'll spend some time specifically on board transitions because we know that particularly with nonprofits, those boards, they change over usually every year or certainly on a frequent basis. And so having some good processes and systems in place to navigate and manage those transitions can really catapult your organization into a greater place for success. And so giving you a bit about me, I'm Melanie Schmidt, and I am founder and president of Timpano Consulting, also known as Timpano Group. And we do management consulting, focus specifically for mission-driven organizations, crossing sectors, primarily focusing in the nonprofit sector and the public sector, but also working in the private sector as well. So I've been helping organizations understand transition and change for decades, and have developed a bit of of a specialty in executive advising related to transitions and managing that for the organization, as well as doing that effectively to support employees through that process. So looking forward to sharing some of the content as well as some tips and tricks here with you this afternoon. So let's start right now with understanding change. When we think about change, we must think about transition. The rationale for that is you have change, that thing that occurs, it's affecting human beings, and that leads us into a transition when we start to think about how those human beings are reacting to the change that has been brought into their world. And it is something that cannot be avoided, and that's why it must be managed. And what you can't avoid is the change. There is no heads in the sand about what your organization or you as an individual might be confronting or needing to affect. And so being able to identify and understand that change, also identifying and understanding your own reaction to that change or the reaction of those in your sphere or that you might be managing, will help you in going through that transition process and really helping people deal with the emotions and the processes that will be surfacing over time, so that there's an opportunity to successfully come out on the other side. And so you have a change affecting human beings, leading to transition that must be managed. And so it's important to know that it really isn't the changes that do you in. It really is the transitions that can cause some of the most heart-wrenching or organizationally challenging situations. And so understanding that distinction between change and transition is critical. So to start off with, we think about change. Change is very situational in nature. It is about something that's happening within an environment or within a point in time. It's the thing that is happening. Whereas a transition is psychological in nature. If we remember that between change and transition are human beings, it really is a lot about the psychology of the individuals involved with that change moment and the transition process. Also needing to understand that change is something that can happen very quickly. It can happen in an instant. Something all of a sudden they come into the office or into their organization at 8 o'clock. Everything that they thought may change by 8:05 based upon an organizational announcement that could have occurred, a telephone call that comes into play, or a situation that presents itself. Whereas the transition typically takes time, which is also something that can be challenging for people because we see this change looming and then happening in front of us, and we think that transition is supposed to happen instantaneously as well, but it isn't. The transition is something that will take time for the individual, the human beings, the team to process what has happened, why it's happened, how it's happened. And often those transitions can take up to 12 to 18 months or longer, depending upon the scope of the change and the scope of those who are affected. Another key distinction between change and transition is that a change hinges on a new thing. Because remember, a change is something that comes in, it disrupts a situation, can happen quickly, and it's really about the new. It's introducing the new thing. Transition, on the other hand, depends on the human being's ability to let go of the old, to let go of that which is familiar, that which they may have known, and to accept and go through a process to get to the new thing. Similarly, we think about change spurring that transition. In order to have a transition, you must be working through something, and that's the change, which spurs the transition such that a transition is going to start with an ending. And some of this language about new things and endings we'll go through in a few moments when we go talk about the phases of transition. So a change is spurring a transition, and a transition is starting with an ending. So that when you think about change, focus on reactions. If something's happening, it's introducing a new thing into your environment, you need to think about that and to be able to understand and articulate it from a very reactive position, because that's how the human beings are taking in that change. They're reacting to what has altered in their environment. So that in the transition, the difference is a focus on resistance. And so again, if that change has happened in a transition, you need to focus on what is the resistance that those human beings are inserting in order to accept the new and let go of the old. In a way, that change can be very polarizing. If we, again, go back to a situation that's hinging on something that's new, that new thing for some people could be very challenging or something they're just not at all prepared to accept, acknowledge, or move through. And so it can create a very polarizing situation because of how people are reacting to the new occurrence. A transition, however, again, is more dealing in the psychology, which means that it can be disruptive. And so with the transition, what you're looking to do is find where are the areas of resistance, how is that disrupting the culture or disrupting the lives, so that you can come up with some great strategies to help people let go of the old over time. And change then also requires clarity. Transition demands continuity. And so if we're thinking about that change, we have a situation, it's happening quickly, introducing a new thing, spurring a transition, such that we have to focus on how people are reacting, how they may or may not be polarized. We need to be very clear on what that change is, why it was introduced, and what our expectations are for how people are going to respond and get to the new thing. And so that's the change mindset. In a transition mindset, what we're thinking about is the psychology of the humans that are involved with that. We're thinking on a horizon of how can we be helping people work through their issues, identify their opportunities, so they can let go of that which they knew, end the old, understand that resistance, disrupt their comfort, and then have a sense of continuity and consistency in what expectations are and how things are being communicated to people, so that they can go through that change and lend itself to the effective transition. And so one of the things, a couple of things to think about when taming transitions is spending some time to think about what triggers a change and then when are the transitions. It's helpful to think of those specific examples and would encourage you as you process this information to get within your own mind a change that may have occurred in your life or in your workplace or with an organization that you're serving, and really think about what triggered that. So for instance, if we think about our lives, we can look at some changes that might be triggered. If you think about a change being situational in nature and can be very abrupt and disruptive, thinking about that change that could be triggered is you have a new executive director or a new executive leader coming into an organization. Someone retires or moves on to another position, that triggers a change for the people in the organization to respond to that departure. And then it also begins to trigger another change that has to do with a new executive leader coming into the organization. And even in that, what seems to be a very two sides of the coin process, there are multiple transitions underway. And so the first change is someone's decision either to leave an organization or the decision to have someone leave the organization. And so that triggers a need to understand what led into that. What is the actions? What were the things that are communicated to people to help them understand at an appropriate level why that happened, how it affects them, and what the plan is for the next step in that change process, or to be prepared for the next change, which is the hiring or onboarding of that new executive leader. And everything between individual departure to individual hire is a series of opportunities to really communicate with people and foster positive transitions. So identify what could trigger it, and then understand what are the various sequences of events that need to be managed as transition. When we think about those phases of transition, because we do remember that it is something that's occurring over time, we think about it as how people are reacting and processing what they need to do to let go and get to the new beginning. And so this diagram along the bottom axis, think of that as time. And it's something that was put forth by William Bridges, who is very well known for his research and his applied work in helping organizations navigate change and manage transitions. Would strongly encourage the reading and using of his books and materials. There are wonderful handbooks and step-by-step actions that you can take as a leader and as someone going through change. And so if we think about the left side of the page being that change, that point in time when something happens, and then the right side being everything involved with the transition to the new beginning. What you'll see there are three fundamental phases as William Bridges describes them. The first phase is that ending or letting go phase. This is that point in time when people are seeing the new change, identifying it, beginning to process it, and then saying to themselves, all right, I need to move from where we are today to the new position or the new beginning. I need to go through a process of letting go and losing my affinity or my affiliation with what came before that change moment happened. The second phase is what he labels as the neutral zone. I call this the wait and see zone. This is often where you'll find people who they are open to change and to transition, but they might be a bit skeptical, or they're really not going to jump in with both feet. They might be willing to put their toe in the water for the opportunities that could come from a new beginning, but they're not going to commit quite yet. And that third phase is what Bridges calls the new beginning. And this is where people they've let go of the old, they've worked through their own internal issues or processes, and they are in the new place, right there. And what you can see from the point on the left is that some people are at that new beginning from the get-go. You tell them there is a change coming, they're already there. They've worked through their process seemingly relatively instantaneously. These are change agents. They enjoy new opportunities and they can process them very quickly. One thing you'll notice as well is that's a very small percentage of the standard population. A few more people are willing to give you the benefit of the doubt from the moment of change. And so they're saying, all right, I may not be all in, but I'm willing to put 1 foot on that side of the fence or 1 foot on the other part of the grass. And so they're there with you, and that's a few more people. But the vast majority of people in a moment of change hold on to what they know. They are not prepared to lose their comfort. They're not prepared to let go. They're not prepared for the ending that they perceive at that moment of change. And it's really important to understand that within an organization or within a team or within a family, you'll have people instantly in each of those three phases at the same time. And so it's critical for leaders to understand that managing a process of transition is also highly customized and requires great adaptability on the part of the leader, on the part of the leadership team, to figure out where people are and meet them in that space. Because over time, if you're managing that transition, attending to individuals' interests, helping them process the change, see the opportunities, understand the risks, and to work through that, the majority of people will come to the new beginning. And so you'll see over time, pretty quickly, a lot of people will let go. They'll say, all right, I'm ready to move. I'm moving into the neutral zone, and I'm going to test you. And that's where the continuity and consistency on the part of the leader is critical. Because if you set forth at the point of change expectations or promises or statements people are going to hold you to those through the neutral zone. And the more they see you acting consistently and the greater transparency and trust you're able to build with them, the more quickly they'll move into the new beginning. And so you can see by the end of our transition process that a majority of people are now with you. They have taken on the new beginning. Some people are forever going to be in that neutral zone. They just can't quite trust that this is going to stick, or that what they know perhaps is not going to change again. So they aren't completely comfortable, but that's all right. You'll need some of those folks within the organization to have great perspective and great balance. And you'll notice even over time, you'll have some people who cannot let go of everything they knew before that change. And these are the hard conversations and the difficult reflections that people really need to embrace and work through. In organizations, the folks who cannot let go are often the ones who end up being let go. And so it's important to give that process time and to be respectful and understand that some people just are not going to be able to accept that change and move forward productively. And so then you may need to have a different conversation with them. And so those are the three primary phases of transition that William Bridges has used to describe it. And I found them very useful for organizations to think about, where am I in this process? How much time has passed? And important to note that much of the research, again, will suggest that a transition process, particularly within an organization, often takes at least 12 to 18 months. And so it's important to remember that, to set your expectations in that way, that if you're making a major change to the organization, or it's experiencing a tremendous growth or a tremendous constraint, that is going to take time and is not something likely to fully transition overnight or within 30 to 60 days. And so when we think about the process of making progress in a change, it's understanding what's the first task in that change management process, what is the first task in a transition management process, and how are they distinct? So consider that the first task of change management is really to understand what is the desired outcome and how are we going to get there. If we're introducing a situational change, what is that new beginning to which we are inviting people to come? And how, as an organization, or how am I in a personal change, how am I going to get to that new place? So that if this is what's happening in the situation, this is why it's happening, this is where we want to come out on the other side, and here are the various steps that we can take in order to get there. And so in change management, understanding where you are, where you want to go, and how you're going to get there is critical. And the first task then in transition management, when we think about the introduction of the human component, is really to help people leave home. The first task of transition management is getting them comfortable with the fact that they're going to be uncomfortable, and that what they knew and where they are today is not where they can be tomorrow in order to be successful as an individual or as a member of the organization. And so doing that requires a lot of reflection on the part of whomever is introducing the change, to really have a strong plan and a strong strategy for helping people understand the tangible aspects of the change, as well as being prepared to have a lot of conversations individually and as a team in order to help people leave home, let go, get through the neutral zone, and find their way into that new beginning. And so one thing to consider for that transition management is also thinking about how that specific change, or how that specific path that you've identified in your change management process, is actually affecting the individual. And thinking about it from them inside their minds, not from your perspective. And that's also then thinking about what are the leadership actions that you need to put forward in order to help them leave home and come to the new beginning. And that leads us into some ways of thinking about managing transitions. And so there are different actions that employees and that leaders can that go through and leverage in each of the different phases. And so this chart will again show you the 3 phases, and then it offers some perspective and what might happen in each of those stages or each of those phases. So for instance, when we think about change moment has happened, we're looking as people start letting go, or we're looking to help them let go. From an employee perspective, remember that this is a grieving process, that they are letting go of something that they knew or something that was familiar to them. And so it will often go through the very same types of emotions and the types of roller coaster rides that you'll see an individual go through during a grieving process. And that's why as a leader, it is critical to communicate. When you have introduced change and you are helping people understand it and to figure out how they can let go, this is where you need to be having those individual conversations and the team conversations so that you can gather information. Where are my employees in this cycle, either in the grieving process or in the transition process itself? And to be thinking at an individual basis, when you're having conversations with employees, be very clear on your objective for whatever conversation you might have. What are you intending as an organization or as a leader to come out of that conversation, and how clearly are you communicating that to someone? Really thinking about what does success look like at the end of that conversation. And from a team perspective, it's an opportunity within an organization for thinking about how you can really help a team focus on letting go in a way that helps them advance the business objectives. If you're introducing a change, the hope is that it's for the betterment of the organization and to create opportunities to advance the mission. Communicate that over and over. It's similar to what we've heard in creative agencies and other things. When you are sick and tired of seeing that new logo or that existing logo of yours, it means the general public may just start to be paying attention. And so as a leader, remember that you have a lot of time to process change before your employees even know it's on the horizon. And so give them the courtesy and the benefit of additional time by communicating to them, so that once they can get into the neutral zone, when they are going neutral, letting go, but they're not quite new, first phase in that is understanding. So employees are starting to understand why that change occurred, how it can improve their situation, or how they need to react to that situation. And so a leader needs to be very direct. When someone is starting to let go and going into a neutral zone, going into a wait and see moment, this is not the time to enable concern. This is not the time to be indirect in your communication. It's a time to be incredibly candid and respectful about what questions may be asked and how you can help them, again, continue to move toward the new beginning. And once you move into that going neutral, then there's that big bell curve section of that where people are getting oriented. So they're starting to figure out what that change was and all about and what this new thing might be. And so that's when employees start choosing. This is when they start choosing, am I going to stay in the past or am I going to go to the new beginning? And so a leader needs to be engaging employees in the conversations, in the choice, in the vision of how the new beginning is going to benefit them, how it's going to advance the mission, how it's really going to help the organization thrive, not just survive. So that can move people through the wait and see neutral zone and really start anew in the new beginning. And so employees at this point are really progressing. They're embracing things, they're working through it, they've changed their behaviors. And so the leader's action at this point is to coach. It is to reinforce the behaviors that you want to see, reinforce the successes, identifying and creating safe space for people to assess things that aren't working as well, to embrace mistakes as learning opportunities, or to embrace new unknown situations as opportunities for people to really explore, test their talents, and find new ways to contribute to the organization. And so this is really requires a lot of recognition on the part of the leader, and requires the ability, again, to flex and adapt as you dance from the point of change to letting go to being neutral to starting anew. And so when we think about letting go, a few tips and techniques here to help understand what can you do as a leader to expedite and enhance that experience. And so when we think about letting go at that moment of change, describe the change in as much detail as possible. When you're introducing that change and really helping people let go, abstract platitudes or concepts can make it more challenging for people. So the more detailed, the more concrete you can make it, it helps people really internalize and understand the direct impact on their situation and on them as a particular individual, or on their interests for the organization. And so that's also, when you're describing the change in as much detail as possible, also identifying the ripple effects of change. We know that once we throw that stone into the water as that instant change for that situation, then all of a sudden the ripple effects happen, and you start to see that energy moving out into greater and greater circles and greater spheres. So think through, if this change occurs, then that, which triggers this, which does that, so that you understand the full sequence of events that could occur. Because as you're identifying those ripple effects, it will help you also identify who has to let go of what. Typically, when change occurs, it really is not equal. It might be more on the equitable component of things, but it's really not the same for everyone, because human beings are fundamentally not the same. And so how we all react to change is going to be different. And so what we may need to let go in any process is also going to be different. And the leader's responsibility is to identify that, and to also really notice intangible losses for people. And so noticing that it might be the fact that if you had a new facility that was built or put forward, that an intangible loss to someone might very well be the routine that they go through to walk from their home to the current facility, which provides them time to meditate or to prepare for their day or to respond to things that are happening in their world. And when you move them to a new facility at a new address, that routine is lost. They have to come up with a new routine. And so noticing, for some individuals, not a problem. They adapt in an instant and they move on. For others, that sort of disruption can really be, again, something they need to grieve and work through. So paying attention to what are the intangible losses as well as the tangible ones. And then it's really important in that letting go phase is helping and noticing whether there is something that is now over for everyone. Is there now a moment when everyone in the organization has identified the fact that they're okay with not having individual responsibility for resetting the server because it's been contracted out to a vendor, or they now have an IT person on staff to take care for that? That example for some may seem questionable, but when you're moving from particularly a small organization where everyone's responsible for everything, or they have that need to problem solve, moving into a more specialized staffing model where all of a sudden someone's responsibility needs to be given or taken from everyone to that individual can be challenging. But typically at some point, everyone's ready to celebrate the fact that now we have an IT specialist who takes care of resetting the server, and I don't need to worry about it. And when that happens for everyone, celebrate it, point it out, make it a positive move, again, for advancing the mission of your organization. And when you're moving then from letting go to neutral, critical to not ridicule the past. And that can be really easy to do, particularly when people are starting to get excited about the new beginning. all of a sudden, oh, 2020 hindsight, we can't believe it used to be that way. Can't believe that the leadership of the past had put that forward. And inadvertently, it can come across as ridicule, particularly for people who haven't left home yet. And so being really respectful of the past and honoring those traditions. And in honoring those traditions, it's important to not stamp out the past. If there were certain things in your organization that worked really well pre-merger, and you are going in to a new situation with two organizations coming together, that doesn't mean that you should stamp out the social gatherings that occurred on a routine basis in Organization A. Honor them, adapt them, find new ways to put traditions in place, but don't stamp things out, particularly because you risk losing people who need some time to process that change. In a way that positioning the past as a really positive legacy serves everyone well. It allows people to celebrate the good things that have happened in the past and really understand how that is going to help them move the mission or serve their clients moving forward. And so it's a positive legacy position. And so that another key component, and this is something that particularly if you're dealing with some sort of physical change, like moving of space, a capital campaign for a new facility, a merger of two organizations, find ways to let people take something with them. It might be something physical. It might be, as you're going through a capital campaign process, building of a new facility, that everyone can go around the building and take a literal piece of the building with them into their new workspace. Or it could be that there is a specific operating principle or something that helps shape the behavior of individuals with the organization, and a new merger comes in. Let them take that with them. It's just sort of being aware of not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, if you will. So that when we think about new beginnings or starting anew, critical component for leadership and for communicating and navigating that transition is making it meaningful. We hear a lot about that change for change's sake or transition for transition's sake. And the key is ensuring that if you really want someone to get to a new beginning and start anew, make it meaningful to them, for the organization, and also for the people who matter. If they're making a difference, ensure that that new beginning is going to be meaningful for them. Such that in an organization, it's critical to address both the individual change that needs to occur as well as the collective change. And that collective change can be happening on many levels. So you have the individual change, you may have then team change, department change, interdepartment change, and then organizational change. And so knowing, again, who's affected in each of those ripples and how are you framing the positive, meaningful outcomes so that they can all start anew as an individual and as a collective. And understanding what's needed to support the individual and the team in order that they can deliver on the mission and on the intended outcomes. Because new beginnings start with the people. And this can be challenging, particularly for planners or organizational leaders who are often drivers or those who are more task focused. And so they'll put together a plan and they will have it step by step of how things need to go, and then forget that what this is all about is the fact that we had a change to which human beings were added to lead to the transition. And so when you think about new beginnings and that positioning, it needs to start with people and then move to process and task and reinforcement. And another thing about new beginnings that's critical, particularly for leaders, is to consider the marathon effect. That, again, we talk about change and transition together taking upwards of 18 to 24 months. In some organizations, it can take 3 to 5 years to really institute a cultural or systemic change in a way that it is carrying on appropriately. So consider that it's going to take time, and you want to have that steady pace throughout the entire process with some, spurts here and there, but also some slower periods and some resting time, some pit stops, if you will, for folks to gather their water and rejuvenate to continue on into the next leg of that marathon. And so understanding it's not about overindulging or over influencing people at the beginning. It's being very steady and very confident and consistent in how you're helping people move from letting go into the neutral zone to find a new beginning. So when we think about navigating the landscape, some of the key components of navigating that time frame between change and through the new beginning is really engaging with positive intent. Again, if this is meaningful, if this is something that will enhance the organization, understand the role of trust and your part in building it. And that's, again, whether this is happening from a leader thinking about their part in building trust, or if it's about someone who went to the new beginning, they were right there, and they're working to help their colleagues or their peers find their way through the process. We all have a part and an opportunity to build trust and to advance that through the organization. And so to do that, we also have to understand what matters to individuals, to the team, to the organization, to the constituencies. And then we really have to work to protect it. And again, that requires great reflection, great candor, and strategic discussions about priorities and resource allocations. And throughout all of that, if you want to be navigating successfully and positively, it comes back to ensuring that you're providing context, support, and purpose, giving people not that light at the end of the tunnel, but ensuring that you have actually installed track lighting all the way along the top of it so that they understand where they're going through, how they're supported in that, and what's going to be better for them and for the organization on the other side. And one way you can do that is clarifying those new priorities, helping people really understand how that change has changed the way decisions are made or resources are allocated or how they're supposed to be doing their work, and then giving them specific examples in order to understand that. Another thing that can be really helpful in navigating that change is being clear on what people need to let go of at what point in the process and what they can hold on to at what points in the process as well. And so again, with that, if we're talking about going through reacting to a change, everyone doesn't need to let go of everything right away. So thinking about, again, that concept of having an organizational merger, if you are bringing people together, they may not need to let go of everything they know or every process that they were comfortable with at the beginning of that merger, at that point of announcement. But what can be clear is that for the first 6 months, we're going to take time to step back. We're going to do an organizational assessment. You can communicate how you're going to gather information from people. Tell them they should continue to use their existing processes for at least 6 months, and they will be communicated with along the way to update that process. And so that they know I will be doing business in the same way for a period of time. And I don't need to let go of that until the new leadership understands my situation in the organization and starts to communicate to me about how perhaps first some HR practices might change, and then some service delivery might change, quality improvement might change. And so you can phase out the various components or the things you're asking for people. Another component for navigating change is just taking stock of how it happened and then the next steps for moving forward. What led up to the change? What are the steps moving forward? And how are you going to, again, provide support and purpose for people to move through? Particularly important for leaders in taming transitions is to use your influence. So do what you say you'll do and mean what you say. It's sort of that adage of, this is not the time to tell people that things are not going to change. It is something that is not uncommon, particularly when leaders start to feel that emotional pressure or concern from their employees. There is often a temptation to try and soothe them or to try and sort of calm them by saying things aren't going to change that dramatically, or we're not going to change X and such. The challenge is that you're reacting and adapting during the transition. And what will happen is people will hold on to that one thing you said in the moment of change and hold you accountable for that as the organization is evolving and adapting. So be very careful and very intentional about what you say. And should something change, warn early and warn often to let employees know, when we talked about this 6 months ago, here was the situation, here's where we thought we were at the time, this is what's changed, and this is why we now need to shift our expectations. So being, again, very transparent, authentic, and accountable for employees to help them move through that transition. In the same way that I mentioned earlier, when you're thinking about preparing for those individual or team conversations, it's really about getting into the mind of the individuals with whom you're speaking or upon whom that change was thrust. And as a leader, your responsibility is to seek to understand their perspective, their needs, their situation, and then to be understood in how this is better for the organization and how they can be part of a new beginning that will be more meaningful for the mission in the long term. But the first part is to understand where they are and what they need in order to move forward. And also to understand whether or not they can let go. So seeking to understand if they are not letting go and they're not capable of that, then you need to be understood that in order for them to stay with the organization and succeed, they need to be able to move in very specific and tangible ways. And throughout transition, big key is to really be patient, because again, this takes time. You're dealing with human beings and a lot of emotion. It's also to be open, because again, people are reacting at different pace, through a different pace, with different rationale behind it. And also just to be very honest and candid. And that is with yourself in terms of your intentions and your success in helping to manage that change. And also being honest with others as well in where they may be doing well with that transition and where they may need to spend some more time reflecting and figuring out a different path forward. So I wanted to spend a bit of time also talking about building some positive paradigms. One of the things we know is that people often fear change. Often people react very negatively to that. And as leaders in organizations, and even as individuals and leaders in our own lives, we have opportunities to change the way we think about change and transition. And so thinking about the desired state, from where we may be to where we want to go. A desired state is one that's filled with bright ideas. There's a lot of engaged energy and there's enlightenment. There is illumination that's occurring. People are understanding and individuals are seeing how that new beginning is going to help advance the mission, better serve clients, and achieve that intended outcome in the future. It's wonderful. And the ineffective paradigm that is often in place, if we think about that illumination, is an on and off switch. One day we are in situation A and the lights are on. The next moment, things have changed and the lights go off. There's very little preparation. There's very little planning. There's very little in the way of helping people understand the context, what support mechanisms are in place, or the purpose of the change. And so that on-off switch can be very jarring. One moment you're in a well-lit room, the next moment you're in the dark. And for many people, that is exactly what it feels like to be going through transition. They feel like they are in the dark. They don't understand it. They don't know what's happening. They don't know whether or not to trust whoever instigated that change or whomever is trying to help manage it, because the lights went off right in a moment's notice. So a more effective paradigm is thinking about it like a dimmer switch. So rather than on and off, moment of change, the lights go off, think about it that there's a moment of change and you're starting to dim the switch. And so with that, what you're also seeing is at that moment of change, People may feel like they're in the dark unless you've taken the time to then think about, if they think they're in the dark, let's quickly ramp up the illumination by giving them context, by giving them information, by understanding that as they go through the process, they may actually get to the neutral zone and slide back to not wanting to let go because something's changed or a new situation has emerged. And so if we think about it less like an on and off switch and more like a dimmer switch, we can be prepared for needing to provide more information, for responding to different rooms, different lighting needs, all of those sorts of things. And so that positive paradigm is one that becomes invitational. You're inviting people into a transition process, helping them understand how it's beneficial for them or for their organization in the long term. And it's also ongoing. It isn't something that is the change moment. This is a transition process. And so transitions and that positive paradigm is letting people know that change may be constant and the transitions are also constantly evolving, with very much a forward focus, that this is about moving to a new beginning. It's honoring the past, it is building upon traditions and legacy, but it's focusing forward and helping to move individuals, organizations, and outcomes into a better place. Specifically related to boards and directors, wanted to talk about some of those transitions that occur and ways that you can ease and manage that or navigate that transition process. Because what we know about boards, often they have renewable 3-year terms. The average is still currently 2 3-year terms for a total of 6. Some are going to 9, but you have that transition that occurs every time a board member changes. And so that could even be midstream of a year when someone moves out of state or out of region and is no longer able to provide that service. And so it pays to be systematic in how you're transitioning people off of the board. Thinking about, for instance, having exit interviews, giving people that opportunity to voice what caused their exit, what they would see as potential improvements. Again, giving them that opportunity to share information and process that transition, because they may have given anywhere from 2 to 10 years to your organization, and to all of a sudden have that moment where you're no longer engaged is very jarring and can damage future development activities. So exit interviews are excellent. A volunteer off-ramp. So this may be, thank you for your service on the board. We would love to have you continue as a direct volunteer or on our committee or in a work group, so that you're giving them additional opportunities to continue lending their time and talent. There's also a concept of the ambassador corps. Some people will have this as the emerita members or some ex officio positions. But transitioning people off of your board by then putting them into an ambassador corps, which is an extra special group of volunteers who get perks for knowing your message, what you want to accomplish. And they're the first in with new information so that they can be among the first out in the community, helping to spread that word. And then also special touches when you're transitioning people off of the board, having someone from the board or having the executive director, CEO, send a follow-up thank you note or thinking of you card 3 to 6 months after their service has ended, having a special invitation made to them for special events or fundraising activities, so that again, you're honoring their past contribution and to some degree moving them through their own neutral zone and into that new beginning as a different kind of ambassador or supporter for the organization. And just as you need to attend to that transitioning off the board, there's also a value in thinking through that transition onto the board. And so from that point of identifying someone as a potential board member or interested to the point of their actual first meeting, consider employing 2 different techniques for transitioning them and discerning their interest. One, using a meet and greet recruitment along with some educational onboarding. And so the meet and greet recruitment is an opportunity to put people in a social situation, very low pressure, where it's just, let's talk about who you are and what drew you to the organization. It's networking. It's a networking cocktail hour. So to do that as a meet and greet opportunity so that board members are there, potential board members are there, staff are there, and everyone just gets to see what the dynamic and the flow really is and whether it works for them. And then educational onboarding is that the moment you have them on your slate, you've done that meet and greet, you've given them information, start to educate them about the ways of the board, the expectations for behaviors of interacting with staff, expectations for their behaviors of interacting with the board and the community, but being very educational about that and having that occur over a series of months, as opposed to, again, that on-off switch of, I'm going to bring you into an orientation at which I'm going to hook up the fire hose, put water at you, and then maybe you'll remember something. Spread it out and give people a little more time. So as you move forward, offer some reading resources for you. Again, Managing Transitions by William Bridges, would highly recommend that. It was the basis for a lot of the information that was shared here today, and is also a really great workbook, if you will, for helping you identify the various phases and work through conversations with people. Some of the other resources on there, also just ensuring that you kind of keep stretching your brain and understanding that people have different ways of thinking about things. They're motivated differently. It's also helping them surface their own opportunities in the new beginning and the land that is new for them, and ensuring that you're playing to people's strengths. And as a leader, that you know what your own strengths are and how you're balancing your various talents to bring out the best in your organization and for the people who are going through change. And so upcoming, again, continue to open up if there are any questions that you'd like answered or other things. We do have a few moments here to do that. Reminder of some upcoming sessions that might be of interest to you and nonprofit leaders. October 20th, we'll go through mission-driven marketing, an opportunity to really think about that marketing cycle from a nonprofit or mission-driven perspective. In November, as we move toward the end of the year, and there are things that many organizations wanted to have accomplished, ensuring we're thinking about accountability and actionable accountability, not just talking about accountability, but taking action on it. And then in December, some techniques and opportunities for looking back, as well as looking ahead, looking at those audit or assessment opportunities, as well as future planning, and what are some of the techniques that work well for nonprofits particularly. Third Thursdays, would look forward to seeing you back here in the cyber world. And again, thank you for joining us here today to talk about taming transitions. Would encourage you to go forth and think about a change that may have occurred recently within your own organization or in your own life, and do a self-assessment. When you think about that change, where do you think you are in the transition, in the phases of that transition, and how might you still have an opportunity to bring others along with you, particularly as a leader? It's never too late to help people transition from a change. It just takes more time when you haven't attended to that process from the very beginning. So thank you again. Appreciate you being here. If you have follow-up questions, feel free to send them to me via email or to leave a message. If you'd like to connect via LinkedIn, please reference that you participated in the webinar, as I don't accept all random responses. And then encourage you to like Timpano Consulting on Facebook and follow the Twitter account for occasional posts and forwarding of various references and other insights that might be useful to you, both as a nonprofit leader, but also as an individual interested in taming transitions and helping to improve effectiveness within the sector, within the organization, and within your own life. So thank you very much. Have a great afternoon and go forth to tame transitions and enhance your organization.